Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about optimal training volume. And what we need to remember when I give these recommendations, it doesn't mean everyone has a lifestyle to facilitate optimal volume. That is kind of a big take home. Okay, that is the biggest problem we run into is that, yeah, we can have a discussion of optimal volume, and I'm going to discuss that with you, but we need to be absolutely clear that you're going to have to do less than optimal volume if you do not have optimal recovery and an optimal lifestyle. Meaning you're not eating enough food to recover. You're not in good enough shape. You're not getting enough sleep. You're not getting enough protein. Maybe you have low testosterone. Any of these things, right? If you're in any of these situations, you may have to go below the optimal range. Now, going below the optimal range doesn't mean we don't make any gains. I have seen people make solid gains on 5 or 6 sets for muscle group per week. Okay? I've seen them do it for long periods of time. So again, our context, we need to be clear. It doesn't mean because you're below optimal, you're not going to make gains. I tend to agree with certain circles, and I'm going to disagree with this newer body of evidence from a specific evidence-based circle that these really high volumes produce more muscle growth. Never really been observed that well in the lab, and we've seen plenty of people in the real world, even in a head-to-head environment. Most people who've had the best gains have tended to be below those crazy 25 or 30 sets of muscle group. They just always have, whether it's drug-tested powerlifting or bodybuilding, or whether it's heavily enhanced. Like what you find, honestly, historically, if you look right around 15 sets is where most of your bodybuilding champions, usually close to that is where your best bodybuilders tend to be every week, all right, per muscle group. Now, I'm going to tend to agree with some of these other evidence-based circles. I'm going to agree with guys like Lyle, who are going to tell you about that 10 to 20 set, okay? I've tried working beyond that, didn't see any better progress. If anything, I felt sometimes it was stagnant. I've dropped below that, obviously got less personally, and it's the same thing when I've observed clients. So really it's about 10 to 20 sets. But when we make that, I want to be clear, there can be a degree of overlap. You know, people will say, well, sometimes you train your quads with less than you have big quads. Well, not really, because if we start counting deadlifts in there, we start getting into some wiggle room. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of weeks where I'm about 8 to 10 sets on quads. Okay, but I'm also doing deadlifts. Are we counting the deadlifts in there? Conventional deadlift still hits the quads, and it's still with a fair amount of tension. So then we get into that, well, but that's a partial. But are we not going to count partials? I think that we should. It's still a primary mover. What I wouldn't count is going to be pronated rows and stuff towards biceps. I'll agree there. That's not going to count. That's not going to count. I had never did anything for my biceps, and that's why my biceps are still a bit of a lagging muscle. They got undertrained a lot because I did mostly rowing for a long time. Even when I did chins, it tended to be really low reps. Just got really strong at them, and I neglected curls. Okay, neglected them. But biceps aside, this is one reason I'm telling guys they should probably start doing curls from day one. Don't let anybody tell you you're going to get big arms just off the big compounds. Look, there's a lot of bigger movements that'll work the triceps. You know, especially if you're combining a lot of heavy pressing with something like pullovers and then doing chin-ups and stuff. Okay, long head's going to get hit along with the pressing. All right, fine. Biceps, just not going to happen. Biceps is simply not going to happen. You're going to have to curl. And you're going to be better off. You're going to have bigger arms for it. So I'm going to tell guys from day one, you probably need to be doing some barbell curls. Or at least some dumbbells with really good form. Like kind of the dumbbells you saw me doing in here. But yeah, straight bar curls. I count them as one of my big 5 for a reason. I don't think they're a dispensable exercise. So let's talk about the volume a little bit though. When I say the 10 to 20, what I mean is though, that doesn't mean that 20 is going to be dramatically better than 10. What I'm saying about 10 sets is really for most people going to be your starting optimal range. Okay? And if you get more from 15 or 20, that's almost reserved for the muscles that need the most work. Okay, that is almost reserved for muscles that really, really and truly need the most work. So for someone like me, whose biceps need the most work, it may make sense to come in and do 14, 15 sets of curls every week on top of my lat work. Okay, it may make sense. But for some of you out there, if you're doing some weighted chins, and then you're doing some curls, if you count the weighted chins towards it in your curls, you may be perfectly fine with 10 sets if you started doing that from day one. Okay? Start doing that from day one. So when we have this conversation, I think 10 is your baseline. Now, if you can't recover from 10 sets, you may need to reduce it. And I've seen guys who struggle with this, but then the other thing I've noticed is the guys who struggle with 10 to 12 sets, they're usually out of shape. Even if they had a history of being an athlete or something, they tend to be out of shape. They don't do any cardio, they don't do any conditioning, and they're used to the low volumes. And so therefore, they are prone to overtraining on it. They run into issues or overuse issues. So that's something to think about. Or they're not thinking of stimulus to fatigue on some of these movements. And they're not thinking of those things. So when you look at it that way, that's a problem. But that's really a lifestyle situation, right? Whereas when we start getting up towards 20 sets, you start exceeding about 15 sets. So we talk about that 10 to 20 set. Anything up past 15 sets better be a weak link. In other words, unless you are in incredible shape with a perfect lifestyle, trying to do 18 to 20 sets for every muscle, you're going to burn out. Most people are not necessarily going to handle it if they're training hard. They're just not. You're not training hard if you're able to handle it. Okay? But I digress. Back over to that point. You start exceeding about 15. Because a lot of times if your lifestyle is pretty good, you can get away with 14, 15 for a lot of your muscles. And then maybe anything beyond that could be your one weak link. Your one weak link. Like for me, something like biceps, right? And that's also assuming we count maybe half sets towards a lot of that. So maybe you could count rows as a half set for biceps. Maybe count your bench press and your incline as half sets for triceps. Even though they arguably work the lateral head more than extensions, at least based on the data, you could count it that way, and I think it would be fair. So when we're adding these numbers up, just simply look at, half sets. We could count bench press as a half set for front delts and triceps, and I think that's reasonable. Count it as full sets for chest, assuming you know how to bench correctly. So on and so forth. And I think if we take each muscle and we pick one muscle and one muscle only on the big compound, whatever one's doing the most work, we count that as a full set. And then you take any other compounds that are still solid primary movers, count them as half sets. I think that works for the 10 to 20. And I think most people, that 10 to 20 range, pretty much for everybody, assuming you're going to recover, is going to be optimal. And I'd say for almost everybody, exceeding 20 is going to be just junk volume. And anything under 10, you are compromising muscle growth, but you may need to do so for recovery purposes. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.